All right, welcome to ULT San Diego, everyone, for the Aquarian Almanac Dialogues. The title of this evening's presentation is Dispassion, and that will be given to us by our own Laura Gray. This is called Dispassion by Samyutta Nikaya. Once, while the Lord was abiding at Ayodhya on the bank of the Ganga, he spoke these words to the bhikkhus. Imagine, bhikkhus, that a large patch of froth was floating on the river Ganga, and suppose that a clear-sighted man were to look at it, observe it, and examine it properly. Seeing it, observing it, and examining it properly, the froth would appear to him to be empty, unsubstantial, and without an essence. What essence, bhikkhus, could be found in a lump of froth? In the same way, bhikkhus, whatever form, past, present, or future, inner or outer, gross or subtle, inferior or superior, far or near, is seen, observed, and properly examined, will appear empty, unsubstantial, and without an essence. What essence could there be in form? Imagine, bhikkhus, that when it is raining large drops in autumn, a great bubble arises and bursts on the water, and suppose that a clear-sighted man were to see it, observe it, and examine it properly. The bubble would appear to him to be empty, unsubstantial, and without an essence. What essence, bhikkhus, could be found in a water bubble? In the same way, bhikkhus, whatever feeling, past, present, or future, inner or outer, gross or subtle, inferior or superior, far or near, is felt, observed, and properly examined, will appear empty, unsubstantial, and without an essence. What essence could there be in feeling? Imagine, bhikkhus, that at midday in the last month of the hot season, a mirage appeared. And suppose that a clear-sighted man were to see it, observe it, and examine it properly. The mirage would appear to him to be empty, unsubstantial, and without an essence. What essence, bhikkhus, could be found in a mirage? In the same way, bhikkhus, whatever perception is seen, observed, and examined properly will appear empty, unsubstantial, and without an essence. What essence could there be in perception? Imagine, bhikkhus, that a man in need of a strong timber should come upon a young, tall plantain tree, and suppose that he has chopped it down at the root, cut off the top, and stripped away the outer skin. Looking at it, observing it, and examining it properly, he would find no wood inside, and it would appear to him to be empty, unsubstantial, and without an essence. What essence, bhikkhus, could there be in a plantain tree? In the same way, bhikkhus, whatever mental activity is experienced, observed, examined properly, will appear empty, unsubstantial, and without an essence. What essence can there be in mental activity? Imagine, bhikkhus, that a magician produced an illusion in a thoroughfare, and suppose that a clear-sighted man were to see it, observe it, and examine it properly. The magical illusion would appear to him to be empty, unsubstantial, and without an essence. What essence, bhikkhus, could be found in a magical illusion? In the same way, bhikkhus, whatever consciousness is experienced, observed, and examined properly will appear empty, unsubstantial, and without an essence. Understanding this, the disciple of the Noble Eightfold Path is dispassionate towards the body, towards feeling and perception, mental activity and consciousness, Being dispassionate, he is detached. Being detached, he is released from bondage. In release from bondage, there is knowledge of freedom. And the disciple then knows finished is birth, lived is the life, done is all duty. No longer is there this or that. Samyutta Nikaya. And we now give to you Laura Gray. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you, Monica. That was beautifully read. It brings to mind the quotes that were sent out with the invitation from Truth, and the one on by Plato, where he says, courage is knowing what not to fear, you know. So thank you.
Thank
And
you.
welcome, everyone. And thank you for joining in today for our contemplation on dispassion. The slides that I present are just to help us to understand the subtleties of the words, as we all are at differing degrees of our understanding. You might see something in the readings for the writings for today that may be something I missed, which is really important. Some of the other quotes before I share that Truth sent out, and it's in your email. One is from Rohit Mehta, Patanjali's Yoga, The Art of Integration. And he says there's something very important in regards to dispassion. The dissolution of the reactive centers of the mind is achieved by practice and dispassion. And a lovely one from Audrey Hepburn. She wrote, "You have to look at yourself objectively, analyze yourself like an instrument. You have to be absolutely frank with yourself." I think those are wonderful quotes to begin today. So I'm going to share my screen so we can start. See, there's the share. Okay, I'm gonna go here. All right, I'll enlarge my screen here shortly. Slideshow. Okay, does everyone see the screen?
Mm-hmm.
And how do we minimize this window here? Here we go. There we go. Everybody sees the screen, I hope. The chief obstacle to steadfast persistence in meditation is the fear engendered by ignorance of non-existence, from the Gupta Vidya. We can see in our human life how dispassion is helpful in the performance of our duties, how to truly care and be mindful of what is needed. We must not let our feeling body run away with us. We see it reflected in the firmness of a teacher or a caregiver, in the actions of a general on the battlefield, or while helping in a disaster. A surgeon, nurse, or doctor must exercise dispassion in order to do their work in helping others. And this kind of dispassion is rooted in an understanding of the fact that we are one humanity, one life, together on a journey, that each being is a part of the whole. It is a recognition that we are all links in a chain. Even the child receiving the lesson, or the soldier taking the order, or the patient receiving the care, must also exercise dispassion and have appreciation and respond to the people around them. At this human level, this dispassion comes from understanding that everyone is doing the best they can at the moment. Dispassion is strengthened by love, charity, and patience, the first three paramitas or virtues. Going deeper into our nature, we all have the great potential for observing, learning, and creating. Yet, we have become self-limited, even in the most natural habit of becoming aware and observing ourselves, others, and nature. We might miss seeing the bird and the tree, the way the leaves move when the wind blows, and the sounds that are around us. The psychic nature is given the power of drawing away all our attention. We do not listen with bare attention to the people around us, but carry a head full of our own likes and dislikes. For anyone who has read something of the writings of Thoreau or Whitman, you can see the value of quieting the mind and simply observing. Yet there is no object of awareness more important than the contents of our own mind through the flow of ideas and images that are a constant background of our existence. We rarely make a sincere effort at knowing ourselves as we truly are, as Audrey Hepburn indicated. The effort to know ourselves requires dispassion and objectivity towards the forms that we use. Putting together two passages from Patanjali's and The Voice of the Silence. From Mr. Judge's Patanjali's Yoga Aphorism. Dispassion carried to the utmost is indifference regarding all else than soul. And this indifference arises from a knowledge of soul as distinguished from all else. Ere thou canst settle in Dhyana Marga and call it thine, thy soul has to become as the ripe mango fruit, as soft and sweet as its bright golden pulp for the other's woes, and as hard as that fruit stone for thine own throes and sorrows. Make hard thy soul against the snares of self. Deserve for it the name of diamond soul, or Vajradhara, the supreme Buddha. To put these two verses in practice, it must be done as the Bhagavad Gita states, while the arrows of great difficulty are flying in the midst of battle. Are we able to be indifferent to all but the soul? Are we able to be dispassionate towards our likes and dislikes, our opinions, and make room for the soul needs of the people around us? For the times we succeed in doing so, we put ourselves in the position of the self-analyzing consciousness. And as the glossary states, from this place, we have control over all the elemental forces, and we then can respond rather than react. Each time we do this, we strengthen the bridge between our true nature and the actor on the stage. From the Bhagavad Gita, on chapter 16, fearlessness, sincerity, assiduity and devotion, generosity, self-restraint, piety and almsgiving or sacrifice, study, mortification and rectitude, harmlessness, veracity and freedom from anger, resignation, equanimity, and not speaking of the faults of others, universal compassion, modesty and mildness, patience, power, fortitude and purity, discretion, dignity, unrevengefulness, and freedom from conceit. These are the real powers that can never be taken from us, but by our own errors. For true power cannot be lost to temporary forces. We see that example in the brave people of our humanity in the midst of adversity. For at this stage, dispassion is holding back the hounds of our own personality while responding with compassion to the needs of the person in front of us. We may be tired, feeling impatient, annoyed, etc. But those hounds will not be let off the leash. They remained tethered for self-examination later as to their cause, while at the moment we respond with an open heart to the world karma has put before us. This form of sacrifice opens a door of better understanding and brings forward a few more of the powers of the true self. This is the practice of dispassion, and it is a practice that does not separate us from others and brings us back to Patanjali as we regard only the soul of things. Dispassion is compassion with no personal egotism attached to it. We could say it is acting for and as the self of all. In another way of human behavior, how much do we as students observe in a classroom? If we are thinking about what we're going to be doing on a Friday night, or what we're going to do when we get home, or some of the problems that we have. In a classroom, there might only be one who is prepared and open and ready to learn, while many are distracted by their likes and dislikes. Their own psychic nature has overwhelmed them with thoughts of this and that and carried their consciousness off, as the voice says, a captive slave. We just passed White Lotus Day in honor of H.P. Blavatsky. The great Mahatma said that only HPB was ready for the task of presenting theosophy in the 1875 cycle. She could hold the position of Vairagya, or dispassion, in such a difficult position to hold in the midst of living and working on this earthly plane. But yet it is the task before us all in this upward climb. The great teachers are always ready to serve, and the golden light of our own higher self is ever shining. Our task is to prepare the bridge by clearing away the debris of our psychic nature, so that that light, or the light of our teachers, can shine through the instruments prepared. The higher self can only become visible through the mind and feeling body. The flame feels not the cleaning of the lamp, but the light shines brighter when effort is taken to clean the wick and the fuel. We can use the analogy of students of music who visualize themselves performing, yet fall by the wayside when they realize the effort that is required. They look for easier paths to follow, something quicker with less effort. This too happens in the spiritual life when we seek out leaders and methods. We are not to follow our teachers, but follow the path that they too have traveled. We are at the halfway point of our evolution in the fourth round, the fifth race, and our progress now is by self-effort. Each application of the paramitas, each moment of dispassion, charity, patience, and harmony that we hold is not lost in the world of effects, but is added to our eternal character. So as the voice of the silent says, we are to be of good cheer throughout this process of lifetimes to come. The degree that we can hold on to the lessons gained in our lifetime depends on the degree to which we apply the paramitas to our daily life. To build on the knowledge gained requires that we do not retire into forests of sublime rest, but that we live the life of duty to friend and foe alike. This is the process of lifetimes, and is not unlike the daily work of a young person, that what they must go through to become a concert pianist. Practice and dispassion are emphasized in the Bhagavad Gita in regards to this duty. Duty and the final imperative, says the Bhagavad Gita on page 128. The what ought I do comes in here and becomes part of the process. The actions to be performed are not any and every one. We are not to go heedlessly and indiscriminately by doing everything that is suggested. We must discover what actions ought to be performed by us, and then do them for that reason, and not because of some result we expect to follow. So hold one's mind and desires as not to be attached to the result. By pursuing this practice, true meditation is begun and will soon become permanent. For one who watches his thoughts and acts so as to perform those that ought to be done will acquire a concentration in time which will increase the power of real meditation. Often we think of meditation as something separate from the rest of the day, but how we spend our day, what attitude we hold in performing our duty, clears the mind and makes it ready for contemplation, concentration, and meditation. Duty is the royal talisman for gaining mind control. In the Key to Theosophy, HPB speaks of dispassion as necessary to disentangle some part of what is true from what is false. That often we prefer to believe in what is pleasant rather than what is true. Further on in the Key, she states in regards to comparative study of the great religions and philosophies that it must be done dispassionately and with an unbiased mind. All this is required, she says, to arrive at the truth. It is through the various points of agreement in the comparative study that we find in the inner meaning of each religion and see the great truth in nature. The great truth, both abstract and concrete. She also indicates that if we do not have dispassion of the mind and are constantly distracted by the temporary world, our efforts to study will be interrupted by those desires. The self of spirit and the self of matter can never meet. As soon as we think of our morning breakfast, the meditation comes to a halt. In the Bible, it is mentioned that our God is a jealous God. For me, that has always meant the same as the voice of the silence. Before the soul's mind can understand, the senses must be firmly held in check and not rule over us. It becomes common sense, really. Leonardo da Vinci said that most of humanity looks without seeing, hears without listening. We do not hold the still position of dispassion that allows us to truly see and hear what is around us. As Patanjali says, we are caught up in our own psychic nature. Are we inwardly discerning the real from the unreal? Dispassion becomes a power, the power of charity, harmony, patience, and indifference to our own likes and dislikes. We cannot leave one of those qualities out of the equation. If we do leave out those first three, then dispassion can become cold and dark. We must be self-adjusting and self-analyzing at every step along the upward climb. Just as a rock climber before each step must analyze the strength required. The placement of the hand, where the foot will move to. Will the matter hold our weight? all the while keeping his mind focused so as not to allow the psychic nature of fear and doubt take hold. So too is this required in our spiritual life. While the secret doctrine, in broad and detailed strokes, paints the journey we have traveled and the journey that we have ahead of us, we must each one travel this journey alone with the knowledge of the chain of being, for no matter what our condition, we can always shine a light for others along the path with us. Wise is one who sees all experience of life as lessons for the soul in the school of nature. Act thou for them today, and they will act for thee tomorrow. Could we consider that Mr. Judge was speaking of dispassion when he writes about accepting our karma and our conditions, to be able to see the lessons in this school of nature? We should not run away or complain about our conditions, but see them as necessary for the soul's evolution. The chains of our previous actions create those conditions, and if we work within them with the right attitude, as the voice of the silent says, if we act for those lives today, they will act for us tomorrow. From the Dhammapada. Here shall I pass the monsoon. There shall I dwell in winter and summer. This is a foolish reflection. He does not consider the obstacle of existence. The flood carries off a sleeping village. Death comes and carries off the man, absorbed in cattle and children. He is of distracted mind. Our 24-hour cycle is very important and can be seen as a preparation or a practice for the journey after death. You know, we have our, every 24 hours we go from the waking, the dreaming to the dreamless. And Mr. Judge says that if we should be able to do this with great awareness. And he says it's our duty and our right to be able to go through these three states with awareness. And this might be considered a preparation for the after-death states. But for most of our humanity at this point, we get carried off by the flood. Death carries us off when we are engrossed in worldly life and not yet ready to let go. It is not surprising that many people who have had near-death experiences begin to value life in a true sense. True wisdom of a spiritual kind is freedom from self-esteem, hypocrisy, and injury to others. It is patience, sincerity, respect for spiritual instructors, purity and firmness, self-restraint and dispassion for objects of sense, freedom from pride and a meditation upon birth, death, decay, sickness, and error. It is an exemption from self-identifying attachment to our relationships and a constant unwavering steadiness of heart upon the arrival of every event, whether favorable or unfavorable. It is a never-ceasing love for the self of all, and this is called wisdom or spiritual knowledge. Its opposite is ignorance. That's from Krishna in chapter 13 of the Bhagavad Gita. When we meditate upon death, we may understand the profound truth of what Mr. Judge tells us. What a petty lot of matter, he says, we spend time on when so much is transitory. When we look back on our life, or even our day, we see the obstacles of inattention, or as Rohit Mehta mentions centers of habit that interfere with our concentration in action. There is also a joy and a calmness that we experience when we succeed in removing those centers of habit that obstruct our understanding and discerning of what is true. Like the voice of the silence indicates, Rohit Mehta also mentions that at the end of 100 years of effort, an impulse of work should have been established. The small errors of our life are nothing, but the general sum of thought is much. Could this impulse of work be considered the establishment of a nucleus of that universal brotherhood that HPB brought before us? Rumi wrote an interesting poem in regards to this readiness. He called it the guest house. This being human is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they are a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still, treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. Dispassion in Rumi's poem is not a cold detachment or a lack of feeling, but rather a profound spiritual maturity, a shift from selfish desire to selfless love, often described as dying before one dies, to find true life in the divine. Rumi advocates for a quietude of the heart that transcends the emotional turbulence. He advises welcoming all emotions, joy, depression, and sorrow, without judgment or attachment, recognizing them as fleeting visitors. This represents a non-attached, dispassionate observation of one's inner life, allowing emotions to pass through without letting them dictate one's state. To not create a center of habit or create a permanent residence in the mind. And from Rohit Mehta's Yoga, the Art of Integration, when thought, when thought establishes its sphere of influence in the mind, then a vritti, or pattern of thought, is formed that can become a habit. If thoughts would come and go without forming any permanent center in the mind, then there would be no difficulty at all. Such a mind would always remain free and uncommitted. Such a mind has no centers of habit. Could have wondered if this could indicate the childlike state spoken of in the voice of the silence. We are to focus on the spiritual journey rather than the worldly profits and losses, suggesting that true peace comes from detachment from results and material goals. Dispassion is a form of inner freedom, freeing oneself from the limitations of the ego to experience the vast, unconditional love of the divine. The reactive tendencies beget these virities, and the patterns of thought that become the habits of the mind. Yoga is the holding of the motionless center And in so holding this motionless center, we bring about the dissolution of the very center of the modifications of the mind. We respond to the world around us rather than react. To close, we'll consider the 8 dire miseries. Forsake forevermore, if not to wisdom sure, thou canst not come, nor yet to liberation. For the eternal knows no change. We cannot learn the sacred knowledge or wisdom if we are caught in gain or loss, pleasure or suffering, fame or insignificance, or praise or blame. Such miseries carry the mind off, the captive slave. Stern and exacting is the virtue of Vairagya. If thou its path wouldest master, thou must keep thy mind and thy perceptions far freer than before from killing action. While we live our day in the midst of the temporary and transitory, we can, as Mr. Judge indicates, perform those actions without attachment. This frees us to shine the light of our true being through the temporary, and rather than a killing action, our day becomes a balancing of karma. Thou hast to saturate thyself with pure aleya, become as one with nature's sole thought. At one with it, thou art invincible. In separation, thou become the playground of samvriti, or relative truth, the origin of all illusion. We are to remember always, as the Bhagavad Gita in chapter 5 indicates, that the renunciation of action while performing action keeps us from falling into the ruts of relative truths. We do our work, look after those around us from the position of acting for the self or soul of all beings, and not for any result that the action can confer upon us. And to remember that all is impermanent in man except this pure, bright essence of Aleya. Man is its crystal ray, a beam of light immaculate within, a form of clay material upon the lower surface. That beam is thy life guide and thy true self, the watcher and the silent thinker, the victim of thy lower self. Thy soul cannot be hurt but through thy erring body. Control and master both, and thou art safe when crossing near the gate of balance. When we live in that ray, we balance the karma of personality, and we become karmaless, living in the world, performing actions without being of the world. We become compassion itself. We covered this evening, the power of dispassion from the position of our daily work, from the point of view of preparing for death. We looked at dispassion as it is necessary for gaining knowledge and wisdom, and as a means for our journey back to that sacred seat. Dispassion, and for our consideration for our talks tonight, or our questions tonight that we in comments from Rohit Mehta, dispassion is a condition free from all motives, whether arising from desire for something that has been experienced or for something that has yet been experienced. Dispassion, says Mr. Judge, carried to the utmost, is indifference regarding all else than soul, and this indifference arises from a knowledge of soul as distinguished from all else. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Wow, that was beautiful. So many different areas to find these truths, and you went deeply into all of them. So, why don't we open up for questions? Okay. Well, Chris, yes. Chris, did you have a question or a comment? Oh, how about you, Kirk?
Yes, thanks, Monica. Thank you so much, Laura. That was really very rich, um, and thought-provoking, and very convincing. uh, one got the impression that these are things you put into practice in your daily life. So I think that added sort of the convincing tone to them. So thank you so much for that. I was curious, that beautiful quote you read from Rumi about welcoming all the visitors that
Mhm.
arrive, whether invited or not, and referring to the um, the all of the thoughts and emotions that arise over the course of the day. Presumably, at least that's the way you presented it.
Mhm.
Um, if I'm understanding that correctly.
Yes. Yeah.
And so that's his suggestion or recommendation about how to deal with that, with those
Mm.
visitors, seems to be quite different than what Patanjali seems to be recommending. And this kind of governance, kind of watchful governance of the mind, um, and when distractions arise to or emotions arise or obstacles arise, to in consciously, self-consciously inculcate their opposite. So I was wondering, maybe you could talk about that a little bit, because we've heard others um, describe how that approach that Rumi is giving is really more helpful in trying to come to governance, a proper governance of those unasked visitors,
Mhm.
uh, as opposed to this kind of sort of trying to hold on to a particular thought or idea, which also involves a kind of grasping, and maybe invites the element of passion back into the picture. So anyway, maybe you could talk about that a little bit more.
Well, it is interesting, and I loved what Audrey Hepburn said. I just read that for the first time tonight. You have to look at yourself objectively, analyze yourself like an instrument. You have to be absolutely frank with yourself. And so, to deny these guests um, would kind of make us feel a bit cold. That we would not be, how to say this, that we have to know what these feelings are, or else how are we going to help others if we don't acknowledge them within ourselves?
Mhm.
The other thing that comes to mind is when, of course, we read everywhere about killing out the personality, killing out these lower vrittis. And, but maybe we misunderstand what this process of killing out is. Maybe the killing out is not creating a center in our mind where they have a permanent residence. Maybe it is um, putting them in as objects and examining them like the hounds that are at our heels whenever we try to help other people. We have those hounds. It's not fair. Why did they do this to me? Yada, yada, yada. They are always at our heels, right? So you look at them, you hold the reins of them, you examine them, and you move and you respond to the soul of the situation, the soul of the beings around us, as the voice of the silence indicates, to be hard as a stone to our own troubles, but yet soft as the fruit of a mango for the woes of others. And in regards to applying it to Patanjali's, it's all these dichotomies and these apparent paradoxes seem to exist. But maybe in Patanjali's, in the modifications of the mind, is that it's really important that we acknowledge those modifications rather than just denying them, just looking at them, giving them bare attention without creating, as Rohit Mehta says, a center of habit, kind of like post-traumatic stress disorder. You've created a center of habit around that emotion. And you can no longer look at it objectively. But at the same time, if we're going to help others on this earthly plane, we have to have experience of these guests within our own nature.
I could just add to that a little bit, because it reminds me of what Judge says about self-study, that part of the process is to acknowledge what principles of human nature were operative at any given moment of the day.
Yes.
When we were reacting from the basis of, lower needs and desires as opposed to the higher. And but being very specific about it and penetrating. And I think that part of what that does, along with what you were saying, is that recognizing, as George William Russell makes this point so beautifully, that that we should regard those visitors as not just simply our own problems or issues and struggles in regards to meditation and dispassion, but that these are plagues of humanity as a whole. And we at any given point, we don't know who may be reaching out for us, who may be struggling with those very same elements, and that our ability to deal with them compassionately, clearly, dispassionately, and so on in the proper way, you're also assisting and dispelling your duty towards those who are reaching out to you, whether they're immediately in front of you or not, right? So, yeah, anyway, thank you for that response.
Well, it reminds me of my favorite saying from Victoria Prince. She always says, it's really difficult to be human. And I often wonder if we say that there's only one life, one self, one higher self, the self of all. Could it also be that our lower nature is one too? That we all have one?
Yeah.
We all are working with it, And my lower nature is your lower nature.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. Marion. And then I saw iPhone's hand went up as well. Maybe iPhone first and then Marion?
I thought that the iPhone was Marion. Okay.
Oh, maybe it is. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Marion?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, sorry. I
No
just
worries.
wanted to ask you thank you. That was just so, like Kurt said, that was such a rich, beautiful talk. In the beginning, you mentioned a quote by Plato, and I think it went something like, "It takes courage to know what not to fear." Am I repeating it back correctly?
Yes.
And so I was thinking of that over and over again. I was wondering if you could elaborate on that, and it just to sort of add to that. Wouldn't it take courage to not know what to fear? In other words, in life, or in terms of your talk, we can't always know. We have to experience the fear and then we know what not to fear. So it's sort of like it takes courage before you know, but as long as you set out to know, that's what the courage is. It just seems to me. I'm not contradicting Plato by any stretch of the
Oh, you're
imagination.
perfectly welcome to do so.
No, but I think I would just like to know more about what he meant by that. It seems really obvious, but I feel like there's more levels to it, and also the idea of the courage it takes to not know.
Courage it takes to not. Well, that's one thing's for certain, is that we have that we don't know. We're really, that's the first step, is to not be afraid of not knowing. That would be really important. To be courageous, to put oneself out there and just say, I don't know. I think that that's the first step towards learning. The other thing is, brings to mind the voice of the silence. The very first words, to that the voice of the silence shares with us is that this book was written for those who are not aware of the dangers of the lower id, which is our personality. And we have to learn to discern the real from the unreal. And we find even when we are giving a talk or doing any kind of activity, it's when we realize that the personality is not who we are, then there's where the courage comes in. There's where the faith comes in. There's where we're not afraid of making a mistake. We're not afraid of doing anything wrong or saying anything wrong. What we're doing is we're just acting as truly as we can of the real self through the personality. So in other words, we no longer look with the eyes or hear with the ears. We don't use them, that we're looking through them, not with them. That's what I'm trying to say. So we become the self to the degree that we are aware of it. And that's where the courage comes from. Thank you for the question, Marion.
Oh, thank you. I'm trying to lower my hand.
It's down.
Shobha?
Yeah, hi. Such a beautiful, beautiful presentation, Laura. So much to think about. I have to go back to Rumi. I can't help it. It was so, so, so beautiful. The thought that came to me is, and I thought Kirk's question was fabulous,
Yes.
and I like the way you elaborated on it. But I'm looking at it in a slightly different way. I think there needs to be a certain lightness of being when we talk about meditation, talk about concentration, or that I think it's like, I'm preparing for an exam. I'm getting really stressed out. I have to get rid of all the modifications of the mind. That kind of an attitude, I don't think will get us there. Okay, what is this stuff? Why am I thinking the way I'm thinking? When you do the Chela's daily ledger, what's the point of it? It's not enough to just say, what I did was bad. I shouldn't have done it. What I did there was good. I should continue that. Hold on. It's more important to go into the motive and see, why did I do what I did? What made me do it? I mean, that's where the lightness of being comes in. And I think Rumi's thing about bring it all in, let it all come in, and let me examine it. And also this whole point that, we also have this attitude that the lower quaternary is bad, the higher triad is good. I find that is also a problem. This good, bad, dark, light, all that, get rid of it. We need the lower to help us get to the higher, right?
Yeah.
And we can't reach the higher by hoping we'll get to the higher. We need this lower quaternary. So I think maybe Rumi is telling us something about that. What do you think?
Yes. And with the eyes of the higher, or the higher sees through the eyes of the lower. It's that the preparing of an instrument so that the higher can shine through the lower. And those were the two quotes, when you put them together, the two quotes from Patanjali's and the Voice of the Silence, and the Bhagavad Gita, that it's no good waiting for everything to calm down before we do put the light of the higher through the lower. We have to do it while those arrows are flying. We have to do it strike while the iron's hot, while the passions are at their strongest. That's when we can do the most work. That's the importance of Kali Yuga. Mr. Judge says that during this Kali Yuga, we can make the most progress. Why is that? Because we have these pairs of opposites that we're working with. And so, this is where, if we're having the Chela's daily life ledger, there has to be dispassion. There has to be, as Audrey Hepburn said, I'm going to remember this, you have to look at yourself objectively, analyze yourself like an instrument, and that's the kind of dispassion that we must have when we're doing that life's ledger. Mr. Judge says, don't feel guilt, don't feel doubt. Those are a waste of time. I think Audrey Hepburn says it best there.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it was fun.
David Grossman.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Who's doing the looking?
That's my question. I'm still asking, David. Who is
kind of a conundrum where we're conscious beings and we have to use our consciousness to understand consciousness. It's
Yeah.
There's got to be a few traps in there.
Oh, I remember just as a young person watching someone give the talk, and they held out they made the triangle. There's the Atma, and then there's the soul, the spirit. Then there's how did they describe it? Spirit, and then you have matter and spirit. So you have the one life, and then you have spirit and matter. So then I looked at them and I thought, I can see spirit and I can see matter. So I must not be either one of those. I must be this up here at the top, and because we can see both sides of the bridge. We can see higher manas, we can see lower manas. So why is that? What position are we in that allows us to see both higher and lower? That's truly remarkable. And, we can see the animal in ourselves, we can see the divine. So who are we that we hold that unique position, But we can't see that we are, because in order to see it, we'd have to separate and make it an object. And how can we do that when we are it? We are that self. We can't separate from it, so we can't look at it. All we can do is know that it's the cause of all that we see, all that we feel, and all that is around us. But yeah.
So do we choose which part we play? If we're the actor and not any of the parts, I guess we have choices all the time.
Yeah.
So,
yes. But there again, I wonder about that too, though, David, is that what are we basing our choices on?
Right.
Is that's the key. I think that came out in I think at the beginning with this idea of motive. Where does that motive come from?
I guess what's needed in the present. These different parts, we could look at it as tools in a toolbox, and choosing the right one, which will do. Yeah. Which will work best under the circumstance.
Mm-hmm. And as Mr. Judge says, to focus on the soul of things, that if we are, and that's, if we're focused on the people around us as the soul and not as the role that they play, kind of like the first chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. Our family and friends, those are only roles that they play. That's not who they are. They are souls in evolution. And so when it says to kill out our family and our friends and all that, maybe one way of looking at it is to start looking at the people around us as souls in evolution and speak with them, talk with them, interact with them from that basis and not from the basis of our personality, that it's, we begin to, and I find that when we do that, when it helps our lower nature to go quiet, when we have that desire to help the person in front of us as a soul being rather than as someone other that I have an opinion about.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Just one last thought, since nobody has their hand up. What you were talking about earlier, you reminded me of a saying. You probably heard it. The teacher says to the pupil, "Don't tell me what you know. Tell me what you don't know, and we'll go one
Yes,
step farther." Yeah. Yeah.
that's right.
Beautiful.
Well, that's why I put up those quotes for everyone to read as well, because, you know, a lot of the quotes that we read in these books of devotion have paradoxes in them. And somebody might see something more in them than what I see. And I think that these uh, writings, as we evolve and work along the path, they take on new meanings. So the way we look at them now, at this our stage of evolution, will not be the way that we see them in the future. That they will take on a deeper meaning as we progress, it would seem. So Kirk has his hand up.
Yeah. Sure.
Yes, hi again. Just a couple of thoughts for you to comment on. One was we always liked what Raghavan used to say when talking about acknowledging that we don't know, that's a critical component in also establishing our rapport with other human beings, because the other, when you say it, the other, it resonates, right? Because there's so much we don't know, so much we're ignorant of, But he says you always follow it with the intent and response that I very much want to know. I'm very
Yes.
much a seeker of knowledge. So it's not simply, yes, I'm in ignorance, but I'm a seeker as well, and that's also another way of establishing rapport in true friendship with others, But I also wanted to comment just briefly on the opening reading, because I love that discourse from the Buddha. I never get tired of hearing that. Um, and I was just recently listening to again a description by the Dalai Lama regarding the kind of the essentials of the Buddhist path, the Tibetan Buddhist path, and the necessity he talks about for discursive analysis of phenomena. That is, anything that one perceives, that anything that can be an object of perception, including our own nature, when rightly analyzed, we see it as composed of an infinite series of prior causes, and that it only has arisen through this vast system of interdependence at the same time, or during which all other things that are in the perceptive field have also arisen, and that also, so that when we're in search of an essence, and he says, of course, this applies to self-analysis, right? Where does the self lie? It's obviously not in the body. It's not in the thoughts. It's not in the emotions. All of those are ever changing, so there's no essence there that can be found. But they do have this causal sequence which, if properly traced, leads us back to shunya, what we would call the void. But he says it's not nothingness, right? It's this vast interdependence of all things, and so nothing has an independent existence in and of itself when properly analyzed. So he says that that analysis repeatedly exercised again and again and again throughout one's life, throughout many years of practice, combined with a meditation on the shunyata itself.
Mhm.
And he says that also shunyata itself, when it's analyzed, you realize it's also dependent because it's a concept, right? So there's the shunyata of shunyata, the interdependence, the vital interdependence of what we call shunyata, and that can also be carried kind of in an infinite progression or recession, back again to that which cannot be conceptualized, and that's where the root of consciousness apparently lies, somewhere in there, in
Mhm.
that vast unknown. Anyway, I just that those first discourses of the Buddha, to me, they always have such a resonance to them that obviously still, it's still relevant to us today. So thank you for choosing
Yeah.
that.
Well, one of the things that comes from that for this student at this point in time is when he's speaking of these temporary things like the froth on the ocean. We've got to remember, while the froth itself is an illusion, while there are intelligences and lives that make up that froth that are gaining experience through that form, in the process of everything is in the process of becoming something else. That
Mhm.
froth is maybe going to be tossed up on the shore and will feed a plant, and the plant will grow, which will feed something else. Because you spoke of that interdependence. And so
Mhm.
when we look at this personality, this form that we see that is an illusion because it's temporary, we've got to remember that it's made up of intelligences from 7 different planes of being. And those intelligences are eternal pilgrims on a journey as well. And that our body is like, when you read the Secret Doctrine, the lives that make up our bodies as a humanity today will become a future humanity themselves. There's an eternal quality within them. So when we disregard the personality, we don't disregard that interdependence that we have with all the intelligences in the cosmos. As Mr. Judge says, wherever you see a form, whether it be a planet, sun, a human being, or a rock, or a stone, or a plant, or an animal, it is made up of an aggregate of intelligences. And that we derive all our principles, he says, in the ocean of theosophy, we derive our principles from the universe. So they're not even ours. But they do have an eternal quality. And we're impressing that. And we're helping or hindering the progress of all the lives that make up the form that we call our personality.
Yeah, well, that's all of those details that theosophy adds to that Buddha's perspective, are so critical, of course. But
Yes.
I think that's where part of the reason I mentioned all of that was that he in his articulation, the Dalai Lama, in talking about this, he
Mm-hmm.
was pointing out that Shunyata is not empty. Doesn't mean there's nothing there. It's not a void. It's not a vacuum,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yes.
It's this radical interdependence of all things.
Yes.
So in that sense, everything is divine, right?
Yeah.
Everything is carrying that same, universal impulse. So, but thank you
Yes.
for bringing up all those points. That was very
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's for everybody else that might wonder about it. And we hope that these talks will go out into the cosmos, and other people will listen to them and be encouraged to study theosophy as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah.
May I ask a question?
Oh, yes. Yes, Monica. Thank you.
It, it, my question is about our identity as the self of all and the path to getting there. And what I heard you do this afternoon was you seem to put the positive and the negative in an equality that would allow a person to make the next step. Because I think religion and probably a lot of philosophies would have you hanging in one or the other, without any moving toward the self of all in terms of our identity. And so I wanted to thank you for that. And I'm wondering if there is a definite a definite tendency that we have to be done with in order to think that way. And is this tendency done away with through all the things you suggested, or the Bhagavad Gita, all the works that you suggested? Is this, at least in part, the effort to balance out the positive and the negative? I mean, we can go through that for I don't know how many incarnations before we make the step to the self of all. So,
Yeah. Okay. I think my favorite, what are we done with? I think Mr. Judge, yeah, I'm done. When you begin to realize that this Mayavic plane is always going to be here. It's going to be here for the next 430 odd thousand years. It's not going anywhere. And so, what comes to mind is what Mr. Judge says, how we put so much of our time into things that are temporary. Maybe 80% of our day goes into what is temporary. And, maybe a little small portion goes into what is eternal.
yes.
And so if we can just be done with I think of the time wasted that I have wasted,
Yes.
It's just incredible. Just absolutely incredible to think about that,
Yes.
And maybe that's what we need to be done with.
Thank you.
Is wasting that time. But
Yes.
it's you have to have a sense of humor, but it's truly remarkable. I think preparing for this talk, that's the one thing that always came before me is, my goodness, how much time was wasted getting to this point. And hopefully we strengthen the bridge between the higher and the lower.
Yes.
So that the next time when we incarnate, by practicing these paramitas, by practicing dispassion, because remember what Rota Metta said, that you have to practice. And then you have to take the dailies, Shaila's ledger, right? And go, okay. And then you have to practice again. And what do they say? Before enlightenment, you plow the field. After enlightenment, you plow the field. And I'm sure everyone here today has had their moments of enlightenment. But then you can't hold on to that enlightenment. You have to move past it and prepare for the next one.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have any more questions? Okay, well, we go forward with what you've given, Laura. Beautiful.
Okay. Well, thank you for this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me see. All right.
Good
Bye-bye.
night, all.
Good
Good
night.
night.
Night. Thanks,
Thank
Laura.
you so much.
Thank you, Laura.
Yeah, thanks, Laura.
Laura,
Oh, thank you,
everybody.
Laura. Thank you so kindly.